Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to put on our detective hats and shrink way, way down to investigate the amazing microscopic stories our cells are telling us.
Okay, so what do a bruise, a tattoo, and a fatty liver all have in common? It really does sound like the start of a weird riddle, right? But the answer is, well, it's pretty fascinating. See, each one is a clue. It's evidence left behind inside our bodies, revealing this incredible story about our health, our stress, and even our choices, all written at the tiniest cellular level. So to spot a clue, you first have to know what a normal crime scene looks like, right? In our case, that means getting a handle on what a healthy cell is supposed to be. And a great way to think about it is like a super busy, perfectly organized factory.
Okay, take a look. On the left, that's our healthy cell. Everything's balanced, it's organized, metabolism's humming along just fine. But when that same cell gets injured or stressed out, whoa, look at the right. It gets all swollen, cluttered up, and its most important jobs just start to fail. It's like going from that pristine, efficient factory to a complete and total chaotic mess.
All right, so the very first sign of trouble, the first clue that a cell is under duress, is usually pretty subtle. It's kind of like finding a faint footprint at a crime scene. What happens is it just starts to take on water.
This has a fancy name, of course. Pathologists call it hydropic change, but a more descriptive term is cloudy swelling. And really, it's just the cell's first aid response to a whole bunch of injuries. We're talking toxins, bad burns, even just a really high fever. Now, the really important thing here is that at this stage, the damage is totally reversible. The cell can bounce back.
So how does this actually happen? Well, it's a pretty simple but potentially dangerous chain reaction. First, some kind of injury messes with the cell's doorman, this tiny little pump called the sodium-potassium pump. When that pump fails, sodium just rushes into the cell. And here's the thing, wherever sodium goes, water has to follow to try and keep things balanced. And the result? The cell just swells up like a water balloon that's about to pop. Okay, but what if that initial stress doesn't go away? If the problem isn't fixed, the cell moves past just swelling, it actually starts hoarding. It holds on to stuff it can't process anymore, leaving behind these little piles of evidence for us to find.
And a classic example of this hoarding is a condition called steatosis. You've probably heard of it as fatty change. It's exactly what it sounds like. Cells start piling up fat. And the number one place we see this happening? The liver. Which makes sense, right? The liver is basically the body's main processing plant for everything.
Now, what's really fascinating here is just how many different things can cause this. I mean, you'd totally expect to see alcoholism and obesity on this list, for sure. But look closer. Starvation and malnutrition are on there too. Isn't that wild? It just goes to show that both extremes, way too much nutrition and way too little, can completely overwhelm the liver's ability to do its job with fat. So think about how the liver normally handles fat. It's like this super complex, six-step assembly line. You've got fatty acids coming in, then they have to be processed, converted, and packaged up into these things called triglycerides. But it's not over. Then they get attached to proteins so they can be transported, and finally, they get shipped out. The point is, if there's a breakdown at any single one of these steps, maybe too much fat comes in at the beginning, or maybe there's a problem making the protein shipping boxes later on, you get a massive traffic jam. The whole factory gets clogged and the fat just piles up inside the liver cells.
And you know what? It's not just fat. Cells can hoard other things too. They can pile up extra proteins, which might look like little pink droplets in kidney cells, or even tangled messes in the liver if there's alcohol-related damage. Or they can hoard glycogen, which is a type of sugar, and that buildup is a huge clue for diagnosing something like diabetes. All right, let's move on. Beyond just stuff piling up, some of the coolest, most visually obvious clues our cells leave behind are pigments. Seriously, just think of them as stains left at the scene of the crime, where each color tells a totally different story. And these pigments really fall into two big groups. First, you've got your endogenous pigments. Endo means within, so these are the ones made by our own bodies. Melanin is a perfect example. Then you have exogenous pigments. Exo means outside. These are the ones that come from the outside world, like carbon dust you might breathe in, or, you guessed it, tattoo ink.
Let's start with melanin. This is the body's own built-in pigment. It's what gives color to our skin, our hair, our eyes. But when the production of melanin gets knocked out of whack, it can be a major clue that something's wrong. For example, making too much of it can cause hyperpigmentation, which you see in Addison's disease. And on the flip side, not being able to make it at all is what causes albinism.
Okay, next up is a pigment called hemosiderin. It's this golden yellow to brown color, and really it's just stored iron.
It's what's left over when your body breaks down old red blood cells. Now, I know the name sounds super technical, but I promise, it tells a story that almost every single one of us has seen on our own skin.
And that story is a bruise. The changing colors of a bruise are literally a visual timeline of this whole process. First, it's red and purple. That's the fresh blood, the hemoglobin. Then, after a few days, your immune cells, called macrophages, get to work cleaning it up. They start breaking down the hemoglobin, and that's when you see those green and yellow colors. And that final yellow-brown color, that's the hemosiderin. It's the visible proof of those macrophage cells storing away the leftover iron.
And one last pigment made by our bodies, lipofuscin. This one's often called the wear and tear pigment. Why? Because it's basically the leftover junk that slowly builds up in cells that have been around for a long time. Think heart cells, brain cells. It's what accumulates as we get older. It's not really harmful. It's just a sign of a life well lived. Okay, let's switch gears. We've talked about the clues from inside the body. Now, let's look at the evidence that comes from the outside world, those exogenous pigments, the stuff we might breathe in, eat, or even, inject on purpose.
And here are just a few examples. If you inhale a lot of carbon or coal dust, it can literally stain your lungs and lead to lung disease. If you ingest something like lead, it can leave a very distinct blue line on your gums. These pigments become a permanent record of what our bodies have been exposed to.
Which, of course, brings us to probably the most common and definitely the most deliberate example of an outside pigment, tattooing. This is where pigments, like Indie ink or carbon, are intentionally injected deep down into the skin into a layer called the dermis.
So, have you ever wondered what actually makes a tattoo permanent? Well, it's your own immune system. Those same macrophage cells we just talked about with bruises, they see this foreign ink, they rush in and they gobble it up. But here's the catch. They can't break the ink down, so they just sit there. They get locked into the skin's connective tissue, holding onto that ink essentially forever. That's what makes it permanent.
So let's step back for a second. We've looked at all this microscopic evidence. We've seen swelling, we've seen cells hoarding fat and protein, we've seen all these colorful stains from both inside and outside the body. So what's the big picture? What does it all mean?
Well, what it means is that every single one of these tiny clues tells a unique story. The hemosiderin in a bruise, that tells a story of a recent injury. The fat building up in a liver cell, that's a story of metabolic stress. The lipofuscin in a heart cell tells a story about aging, about the passage of time. And the ink in a tattoo, that records a very personal choice. When you put them all together, they create this incredibly detailed history that helps doctors piece together the story of our health.
It's a pretty incredible thought, isn't it? That right now, as you're listening to this, your cells are writing your story. They're recording everything. And by learning to read these signals, these clues from our own personal cellular crime scenes, we can all become better detectives of our own health. We can pay closer attention to the absolutely amazing and complex story that's being written inside of us every single second of every day.